Brothers trilogy, Tetro was one of my favorite recent films that Walter had edited. I'm going to let the stage become Walter's stage now. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a warm welcome from Walter Murch.
It's great to be in Boston. My mom was raised in Auburndale, just over here, and my dad taught painting at the art department at Boston University. My sister lived in Cambridge. I thought I'd open with this, not that it talks about specifically what we're going to talk about tonight, but this is Victor Fleming, was the guy who directed Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. He said this sometime in 1939. As much as everything has changed, and it's changed a tremendous amount, this observation that is really kind of basic in the sense that the craft of editing can occasionally, and we all try to do this as much as we can, and it's whether we achieve it or not is down in large part to luck. But when something has great editing, you don't notice it, and you don't even notice that the film is directed. It's not a thing that's made by people. It's just things are happening up there, and you're part of it. So in everything that we're going to be talking tonight, this is kind of the underpinnings of it all. Another thing is good to keep in mind, which is that motion pictures plus montage, which is really what I like to think of as editing, the putting together of things, equals cinema. So the art of what we call film or cinema is these two things together because they evolved separately. Motion pictures got invented in the 1890s, but nobody who invented it ever thought of putting these images together in complex ways to tell long, interesting, compelling stories. That only began to be invented at the beginning of the 1900s. So just another thing to keep in mind. These two things are really separate things, and editing is, of all the crafts of film, is the most specific to film. Everything else, photography, costume, makeup, acting, script, are all have long histories that go back into the dawn of time. So, but whereas editing is almost within the lifespan of a single human being. Margaret Booth, who died just a few years ago at age over 100, was the negative cutter on Birth of a Nation for D.W. Griffith. So she lived the entire 20th century. She was born in the 19th century and was one of the preeminent film editors of the 20th century, starting with Birth of a Nation. Two words will kind of circle around today are lovely sounding word fungibility, which just means the ability to change one thing into another, the kind of shape-shifting or alchemy of things. It's used a lot in economics, but it applies especially to what's going on right now. And then metadata, which I'm sure you are overly aware of it now, but you will become even more aware of it in the years to come. There have been three big shifts in human society in the last 600 years, all relating to this concept of fungibility. The concept of money, which is to say bank accounts, which is to say the invention of the economy that we live in now, whether it's capitalist or socialist, it all depends on this idea of things having value. And that you can transform that value into an abstract number and exchange it for something else based on that number. say energy, electricity, the cracking of the electromagnetic spectrum in the 1900s, in the 1800s, really taking hold in 1900, and then information. That electricity was the first time that we had this fungibility in terms of energy. You made it, and then here was a wire. What do you want to do with it? You can do anything with it. You can use it to boil tea. You can use it to run a motor. You can use it to make a telephone call. It's up to you how you use it. It's energy in its purest state. And then information. That the digitization of information, which we're right in the middle of now, is this third great fungibility where we can take data and turn them into digits and then press to digitize with them, turning them into something else, rearranging them easily. And if you want to know what did it feel like to be on the cusp of the emerging electrification of the world in 1911, it feels exactly like, or it felt exactly like it feels now with the digitization of information. And the story is by no means over. It's not even really begun yet. We have no idea where this is going to go. But you think of these three things, money and energy and information, these are basic commodities on which the world turns, and they're this ability to turn them into things that allow them this greater and greater flexibility is a tremendously important shift in our experience. An unfungible thing was me in 1978 editing Apocalypse Now, caught up in the tendrils of this. Caught up in the tendrils of this jungle of film that was threatening to drown us all. It's worth remembering, just on this level, that this stuff weighed things. That 11 minutes of 35mm film weighed 11 pounds, so you had a pound a minute. So Apocalypse Now, so there were 7 tons of work print that we had to hump back and forth. There were 5 or 6 rooms full of this stuff. And it was not fungible. It was what it was. And you had to take care of it, and otherwise it got scratched or damaged, or, you know, it was a substance that was wonderful, but not, it didn't have this fantastic quality that we have today, where the information, the 2 films ago, Tetro, Francis's film, had not quite, but almost, probably 10,000 minutes, but it didn't weigh anything. You know, it was just ones and zeros, and you could fit it on some bunch of terabyte drives. So this is a fundamental shift in how we approach things. This, speaking of power, this was, I was in London a couple of days ago. This is, used to be a power station. It's now the Modern Museum of Art, the Tate Modern in London. And they had a, what I guess was a celebration, but it had a kind of a melancholy aspect to it, a celebration of physical film by the artist Tacita Dean, and she was invited to light up what's this central hall, a turbine hall, at the museum. And she was celebrating the physicality of film, which she felt correctly is under threat. She's trying to keep it around for a while. It was a great hit. It's ongoing. I think it's there till March. People come and look at this stuff. Kids love it. And its way up. It's, this monolith is kind of like a tombstone. Technicolor has gone out of the film business. Kodak is contemplating bankruptcy. Panavision and Arri are no longer making film cameras. And this company in Chicago, the Lavezzi Corporation that made sprockets, is now out of business. So all of the hardware, the substance itself and the things to manipulate it are disappearing from our lives. And you know, is this a good thing or a bad thing, or is it inevitable? How should we relate to this? This artist, Tacita Dean, thinks that there are things about it that are irreplaceable, and that if we go into a completely digital future, we will have lost something. But I think the equivalent is, with the invention of printing, we stopped writing on parchment, and we moved into the world of paper. And something similar like that is happening. So there's a piece of film. This image is the last film I worked on, which we finished just 2 weeks ago. Directed by Phil Kaufman, did The Right Stuff, and I worked with him on Unbearable Lightness of Being. This is the story of Ernest Hemingway and Martha Gellhorn, their marriage from when they met, 1935-36 until 1946. And ironically, because it's a completely digital production, we shot with the Arri Alexa. It was a tapeless workflow, edited obviously digitally on Final Cut Pro. And then we made a digital intermediate, and that's still ongoing at the moment. Phil tomorrow is doing some final tweaks to the digital intermediate. But the film is a celebration of the tactility of film, which I don't think would have been achievable without the digitization of it, because we use and we rely on and we use creatively archival footage from the Spanish Civil War and the Sino-Japanese War, 1938, 39, 40, Second World War, which comes to us from a huge variety of sources. We've been pulling this out of archives around the world for the last year, and some of it's on nitrate 35mm film, some of it's on 16mm film that was been duped 15 times. Some of it has an almost imperceptible grain structure, relatively speaking. Other has pieces of grain the size of tennis balls. And what we've done is integrate our actors. We've nested our actors selectively into this footage, so that you'll be looking at, you know, high definition 4K Arri Alexa material, and then something will happen, and the film will plunge into this world of monochrome grain, and events will happen, usually some kind of fighting, war, conflict going on, and then the story will take a turn and they'll kind of come out of it. So we're diving in and out of this swimming pool filled with film grain, celluloid, sprockets, and then coming up into the world of the digital present. So it's been a fascinating journey. I wish I could show you sections of it, but it's still being worked on. It was financed by HBO, so it'll be seen on HBO sometime next year. It'll be released theatrically in the rest of the world, the non-HBO part of the world. So it's a feature film. It's as challenging and complex as any film I've worked on. It's just nobody would make a film about Ernest Hemingway except HBO. It just gives you some idea of where the studios are. They said, effectively, they said, who's Ernest Hemingway? Not that they meant that, although maybe, but what they meant was, how can we sell this? You know, our audience doesn't know who Ernest Hemingway is. So this is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is this. This is the entire timeline in Final Cut of the film. It's it's well over 2 hours, and I edited it as a single file, so I didn't break it up into reels, which gives you some idea of the power of the way computers can work today. Because we did this, I exported all of this to the sound department at Lucasfilm, who did the mix on this, and they mixed it in a single file, which is the first time they had done that. So there was just one Pro Tools session, which was the whole film. And there's lots to say about that, about how that affects the creativity, both in the editing and in the sound work. But it is a small but profound shift in the way things are done. So we had 22 tracks, video tracks, and 50 audio tracks.
I don't know.
Divided up into bands. The first 8 were dialogue. The next 2 were narration. The next 4 were mono sound effects. Then 2 tracks of mono sound effects with low frequency enhancement, thuds. Then 5 stereo pairs of sound effects with, again, with low frequency enhancement. And then 4 stereo tracks of music with low frequency. What you're looking at right now actually is the final music by Javier Navarrete, the Spanish composer. But we did a temp score, and over the course of the film, we started shooting in March, and we finished mixing at the end of September. So it was a 7-month journey. But as we put the film together, we had a temp score, and then as Javier's music started to come in one by one, the temp score got replaced. I think you can see some of these over here are grayed out. That's probably a temp score replaced by Javier's music. And then source music. It's a period film, and we have a lot of music being played in the world of the film. And then we had LCR effects premixes at as early as I could, sometime in May, once I had the assembly together. I turned the sound over to Pete Horner, who was the sound designer on the film. And I had already put in sound effects, roughly scaffolding out the landscape of sound and music. And then he would take sections where we both felt, well, we need a little more precision here than I can do, or than I have time to do. And so Pete would take a week or so and develop a detailed soundscape for sections of the film. And then he would fold that back to me, and I would put it in as an LCR, left, center, right thing. I was deriving low frequency in showing the film. I was deriving that live using a DBX subharmonic synthesizer. This is another way to look at the film. This is the FileMaker Pro database. Each of these rectangles is a list of data, all centering really around this, which is the list of shots. Every shot gets its own record, but then we can tie all of these things into what scene does it belong to, what visual effects relate to it, what music relates to it, what source, what archival footage relates to it, and my photo system, which I'll talk about in a second, of extracting representative stills. So this isn't time related, but it is a fundamental pillar, and it really has a lot to do with the database management, which on one level is very prosaic. On the other hand, it allows us to do the job. And now that everything, we've gone into this fungible world, cameras and sound recorders and the visual effects house and the script supervisor, everyone is generating digital information, media, and then information about that media, the metadata. Let me just quickly go through. I like to think of editing just to help me grapple with the sometimes immensity of it as having three strands to it. There's the plumbing strand, which we've just been talking about with database, which is how do you get here from there? How do you take this torrent of information and direct it to the right buckets so you don't get drenched by it, and at a moment's notice you can reach into that virtual 7 tons of material and extract the single frame which weighs, a 1/100 of an ounce, and just put it in the right place. The writing part of editing, I mentioned earlier the word montage. That's a French word for editing. It talks about the putting together of the film, that you have to build a film. The montage is building, constructing. Also, of course, there is the editing part, which is, all right, now you've got it together, what are you going to do to it to make it have its final? So we actually need a third word that combines both of those tasks. But operationally, it's very similar to what you do when you write. That famous thing about, the editing is the final draft of the film is true. We are dealing with another language. It's not words, it's images, it's duration, it's color, it's sound, and how they all go together over a duration of hour and a half or 2.5 hours to tell an emotionally and intellectually engaging story. And everything you bring to bear when you write something is brought to bear in the editing. It's just that you're not dealing with things with written symbols. You're dealing with more experiential elements to it. And then performing is, as some of you may know, I stand to do what I do. To edit, I would recommend that you do that both for your own health, but I also think creatively it has an effect on what you do, because editing is not like editing text, which is, I think, why we have been sitting. When the Chems and Steenbecks came in, they were desks, and you sat at them. And I started using the Steenbecks and Chems in the late 60s, early 70s, and I thought they were great, but something began to bug me about them, which was sitting there, because I earlier had stood to work on a moviola, and finally I just said, well, the hell with it, I'll put them up in the air. So I had plywood boxes made like this that put my chem up, and when I made the transition to digital in the mid-90s, it was a no-brainer. I just got an architect's table, and anyway, it's because you're on your feet like a musical conductor, or like a cook, or like a brain surgeon. All of these things are time dependent. You have to do things in a certain time, and editing is very involved, as we all know, with time as a crucial factor, much more so than writing, which is timeless in a sense, or painting, which is just a single thing that you can at least get the sense of in a single glance. We shot, as I said, with the Arri Alexa. It's a wonderful camera. I haven't worked on a film that shot film since I worked on Jarhead, which was 2005. Everything I've done since has been digitally captured. The ARRI, in my experience, is the best so far. And we had 2 cameras most of the time, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, but most of the time we had 2. And it was a tapeless workflow, and this camera generated, the images that it generated were sent to a codex recorder, little thing that sits on the back of the camera. And every day the codex material would be brought to us and downloaded into a big kind of almost washing machine sized contraption that has 30 terabytes of material of storage in it. And so the original, let's call it the negative, goes in there, and then kind of like a genie in a bottle, he says, "What do you want?" And I say, "I want ProRes." "Yes," and it will generate ProRes from the master negative. And then we had to show the material to HBO over the internet through the PIX system we used. So we generated H.264 material that has a reasonable upload time. And then at the end of the film, we were generating the DPX frames, files, which were sent to Deluxe, which is where we did the final color timing. We used Final Cut Pro 7. There's a lot to say about this big transition from 7 to 10. This may be the last time that I'll use Final Cut Pro. I don't know what my next job is, nor do I know what system I'll use. It might be Final Cut 7. But, I am, and most of us are, at a juncture point who have been using Final Cut, and we have to really come to terms with the software and what it can do in the time that it is being developed. We had 5 stations. I had 1. The first assistant had 2. The stock footage editor had 1, and the second assistant had another one, which was linked up with the codex machine. And we had 28 terabytes. A large chunk of that was, 250 hours of stock footage that we had accumulated. Before I ever joined the project, the stock footage editor, Rob Bonds, was working on the film for a year before I ever joined it, doing all of the research material. Almost 2,000 shots in the finished film. Almost 500 of those are manipulated in some way. About 250 in some way that you would think of as a visual effect. Phil Tippett's studio in Berkeley, he is an ex-ILMer. He did the walkers in Empire Strikes Back and founded his own studio. And Chris Morley was the visual effects supervisor with us. And the big challenge was finding how to get our actors nested in a pre-existing shot with an existing grain structure and make it look convincing. In the film, we're not obviously trying to make you think this is reality, although it does have a compelling, realistic feel because of the authenticity of the image. But there is a big roller coaster ride of going from a highly granular structured world into a grainless digital world, and then back again, something like 16 times over the course of the film, in and out, in and out. And we celebrate that. It actually has a remarkable effect when you see it, of this grain coming in or going out over the course of a shot. Almost a little over 250 were repositioned or blown up in some way. This is a side effect of shooting digitally, that we have suddenly a great freedom to recompose the image in some way, either by blowing it up or making a move on it or splitting it in half. taking performance from one take and combining it with another. All of these kind of things without it being noticed. There was a rule of thumb working in film that you couldn't make anything, you couldn't blow up more than 120%, 100% being nothing, the image as shot. So 100% is no blow up, 120 would be 20% larger. And beyond that, you started to see grain. Whereas with the Alexa footage, we were able to take a piece of film like this and blow it up that much, which is to say 240%, without it being noticeable. In fact, we went even further because of our roller coaster ride with grain. The image starts to degrade noticeably once you go past 240%. But you know, we had footage in the film that was, you know, much more degraded than that from 16mm footage that was almost 80 years old. So I've got lots more to say. I realize I'm running out of time here.
Very good.
Well, let me jump tracks then. This, I'll just complete this idea. This is this little thing over here is the recorder that gets attached to the back of the film, back of the camera. And every day it came into our editing rooms and we downloaded it, emptied it out into this machine. This is the kind of the washing machine I was telling about. That was our lab. This device is called the Codex Lab. And theoretically, it does away with the necessity to send your footage or your material to a real lab where they make copies that, you know, they give you the codec that you want and they sync it up and all of that. This machine does all of that. As it turned out, things are never as simple as they're supposed to be, so this required a lot of babysitting at the beginning. HBO intends to use this on all of their films, but we were the guinea pigs for this, and we learned a lot about this. We would get metadata out of this material, obviously the image itself, but then all the data about the image, from what lens did they use, what was the f-stop, what was the color pack, this whole concept of the CDLs and the lookup tables, giving you lifting you up from the raw data which is captured, and then giving it a final tweak. The DP, Roger Stouffer, a Dutch guy, a man who lives in Los Angeles now, at the end of every day, he would take what they shot that day and do his magic on it, giving it exactly the look that he wanted. So that this information was in there. We would transform this XML into FileMaker Pro, which is the database I was showing you, friendly data, and then suck it into the database that I have. The same thing for the script supervisor. She was working with a program called Script-E that is all on a laptop, uses proprietary software, but generated XML, which we transformed into FileMaker XML and then into the database, and then the sound, same thing. I won't get into this because I don't fully understand it, but this is XSL magic wand that gets waved that takes output XML and turns it into input XML. Anyway, there was this shocking event that happened in June, which was the publication of Final Cut Pro 10, or X. We'd been looking forward to it. I had been at Cupertino in February, where it had been dangled in front of us, and some of its strong points, the 64-bit processing, had been laid out. It was a kind of a beta version, and then immediately after seeing that, I got plunged into the maelstrom of actually making a film, where you're working 14-hour days and you don't have time to really surface it all. And then suddenly it was June and Final Cut Pro got published. And I quickly looked at it and said, I can't use this. If I wanted to use this on the film that I'm working on, I can't use it. So I began to wonder, what is the pro part of it? Because it didn't have XML. I depend absolutely, as you can kind of tell, on all of this metadata being, having a home and winding up in the right bucket. But it didn't have XML. It didn't have shared area network support, so we couldn't have multiple editors. And as you saw, I have 5 workstations, and everyone has to be able to open up the project, which is on the RAID. So I got confused by those 2 things, which were one of a number of things that made me and a lot of people wonder what's happening. And so I wrote a letter to Apple asking them that, basically saying, what's happening? Because along with publishing Final Cut 10, they end-of-lifed what I was working on. Meaning it was still there on my machine, I could still use it, but you couldn't buy it anymore. So if somebody wanted to add some more seats, or the school wanted to add some more stations with Final Cut, officially they couldn't do it. And so it made me and everyone wonder, what's the thinking behind this? So there was a period in the Cold War when there was something called criminology, which was looking at who was on the podium during the parade to try to figure out what were they doing back in there. And so, Apple, which is a very closed, secretive company anyway, did this thing that didn't seem to make any sense. And I still don't know what the real reason for this is. I think it had something to do with the schedule. That had been 2 years since they last published anything on Final Cut, and there had been this decision made to completely revamp the software and make it worthy of building a foundation worthy of sustaining development over the next 10 years. The Final Cut that we've been working with and love has its faults, and some of those faults are simply the result of having been the base code of it having been written in the late 1990s. They, in a sense, they couldn't wait any longer. They had to publish it even though it wasn't ready. But simultaneously, killing the thing that was workable was a confusing thing. Anyway, we started a dialogue, and I sent them a list of, here's my list. I'm sure everyone else is sending you this, but my list was XML. Please get this working, because this allows, there's that thing of when your kid's at school and the report card comes and it says, does not play well with other people. And that was kind of, now this lovely kid, the Final Cut was like being a problem child. So XML allows you to play with other people, and shared area network allows you to play collaboratively in the editing process. External monitoring, which I absolutely depend on, was not supported. Please support this. Where's my list? You weren't able to open your previous programs in the new program. So it's like, imagine Word saying, oh, we've redesigned word processing, you'll love this, but you can't open your old documents. Which is another, what? kind of a thing. Because of one of the major redesigns was the lack of any tracks. You saw that slide I put up where I had 50 soundtracks. That I don't technically need 50. I could have condensed all of that to maybe 20 if I scrunched it. But by taking advantage of the fact that Final Cut has 99 tracks, I'm able to apportion the material in bands just to give myself a handle on what's happening here. Oh, yeah, this is dialogue, there's sound effects. And I can channel those to a little mixing board and selectively raise or lower the levels of those in real time. There was no way to do that in the new Final Cut. Everything just came up. You couldn't selectively choose what to do. Tape no longer supported tape in and out. And on this film was tapeless, but the previous film was very definitely tape. So what would I do? Anyway, there has been a new version of Final Cut 10, which goes some distance to addressing some of these problems. It does have XML. It does have shared area network support. It does have external monitoring. It does have assignable tracks, not in the same way, not 50 tracks with divisions in between them, but a free-form thing where you can assign you can tell each clip what it is. You are dialogue, you are sound effects, and then hopefully the audio will go in the right direction. And it does not yet, let's see if I can show something here. I'll just skip ahead. That's my editing room. That's what I saw every day when I came in. I stand, as you can see. If you do stand to do, if you take that challenge, get this little thing, just a little stool. I was at a department store once a number of years ago, and I looked around behind the counter because the salespeople are there, stand on their feet all day, and there's usually one of these there, which allows you to put one foot up on a stool, which takes your back and keeps it from doing that. So it rotates your lower back out, and then you can change foot over the course of the day. And I worked long hours. 14 hours was not at all unusual, but I'm not standing for 14 hours because at I have to do desk work, I have to make phone calls. But at the moment of actually editing, deciding where to cut, those crucial moments, I cannot sit. Anyway, it's I think creatively good and healthier for you. That's the sound system. I work in a 3.1 environment, so there's an LCR speakers here, and then this box, this cube over here, this guy is the 0.1. I put the dialogue coming out of the center speaker, and the music comes out of left and right, and the sound effects, atmospheric sound effects, but come out of left and right, stereo, but pinpoint sound effects like a knock on the door or gunshots and that kind of stuff. Close shots would come out of the center, and it gives you, along with the low frequencies where you feel the sound, it gives you a really close analogy to what the finished soundtrack will be. We took a copy of that, a 3.1 soundtrack, and made QuickTimes of it, and had that exported to Pro Tools, and we had that in the mixing studio when we were doing the final, which is in 5.1, with many, many more sound effects and much more detail than I could really cope with just in terms of time. But we were able to, go back and forth from here's the Final Cut Pro output, and here's what we're mixing now. And aside from the fact that there weren't surrounds, it was a pretty good, it held up. And we had screenings for HBO where we ran just the 3.1 sound at a big theater at ILM with a 50-foot screen. It sounded like a movie. I should mention also just another thing about the where we're at, kind of the death of film aspect of it, is that we were showing the ProRes output from Final Cut at ILM on a 50-foot screen, and it looked great. It just looked great. There was no pixelation, no artifacting. Only if you were really looking in some smoky scenes, you would see that banding, at subtle gradations of light in smoky areas, you'd see that. But it even got to the point that even after we were doing the first generation of the DI, we had a screening of the DI, but certain shots were still being cooked on by the visual effects house. So I took the DI and we made a ProRes version of the DI. And I was cutting in these new shots, and again, it was just, perfectly transparent experience. Anyway, the folks at Apple are certainly aware of the turmoil that has happened, and are saying they are dedicated to making Final Cut be making it true to its word, that it really is a professional item. I think the key to maybe seeing what into the future, they don't talk other than saying, yes, we'll have multicam in January, but no, there's clearly been a big shift at Apple over the last 10 years, that Apple was on a kind of life support for a while, sustained in the early parts of this decade, the last years of the last century, by the professional market. We professionals liked very much how Apple, how the Macintosh worked, how it processed graphic information. And we made a lot of noise about it and bought a lot of this stuff. I mean, we, as the culture. But starting with the iPod and the iPhone and now the iPad, Apple has broadened out into a truly mass market creature. As I said, I was just in London just last week, and as a common experience, I'd be walking past two builders doing cement work or something, and they're taking a break, and they're sitting there, and they're looking at something, and I peered over the edge, and they were both on their iPhones. So, this stuff has deeply penetrated into the culture, and there is a wedge of a world opening up who are now getting access to the grammar of film, which has been part of our experience, those of us working professionally for as long as we've been doing it, but this is broadening out into the culture with unforeseen consequences. But it's important, it's important to make this stuff easily accessible to people who are experiencing it for the first time. There's a decision at Apple to kill Express, which was kind of the mid-market, and make Final Cut Pro work at that level, and hopefully with XML and with working with third-party vendors to be able to use that as a foundation to rebuild a professional ecosystem, which, as the SuperMeets demonstrate, is a very viable and very active part of the whole experience. So I'm encouraged by the developments that have happened in the last month. Since September, this new version was published. It's still some way to go. I haven't used it in any real-world situation. As I said, I just finished a film, and when you're on a film, you're kind of making a film is about as much as you can ever do. So I wasn't able to then take some time out and really get my hands on it. That will be the proof of the pudding is in the eating of it. It doesn't matter what people say. It's like, how does it really feel when you start to do it? So I'm cautiously optimistic, but still a little traumatized by what happened over the summer, because it makes you start to wonder, what, do they love us? No. They like us, and they say they love us. But I mean, I'm a big fan, as you can tell, of FileMaker. And there are some things about FileMaker that, if we were trying to toss a football into the future and say, where is this really going, there are two things about FileMaker that I would love to see implemented in video editing software, whether it's Avid or Final Cut or Adobe. It doesn't really matter, but with FileMaker, you're given access to the layout layer. So you can peel back the skin and get your hands on the architecture underneath, and you can recombine that architecture however you want. You change the font of this, change the size of this window, make this thing do whatever you want. So you can customize your car, in a sense, much more deeply than the different views that are available to us in editing software. So something like that would be fantastic. Fundamentally, editing software is three things together. It's a database, a clock, and a graphics program. Of course, it's easy to say that, but those are the three pillars that any editing software is. So if it's a database, give us access to the layout layer, and you, meaning Apple or Adobe or Avid, will save yourselves a ton of headaches, because we won't have to keep phoning you or pounding on you. We can, if we're interested, we can do it ourselves. Anyway, let me open things up for questions. I've got some cards here. I can take a crack at these. Michael, how are we doing time-wise?
We're doing okay.
So, will editing ever be done by robots?
Oh.
If so, when? If not, why not? Well, it is kind of being done by robots. XML is a kind of robot. We were able in FileMaker to have our metadata. Here are the shots that were shot yesterday, and we were able in XML to arrange those shots in a certain order in the database and then export that information as an XML, and that would trigger an event within Final Cut, and it would make a sequence of all the shots in the right order with appropriate amounts of black in between each shot with metadata information about what that shot was. And you know, that's a job that would normally be done by an assistant. Okay, you take the shots and string them out along the timeline. Now it's just and it happens automatically. At the creative level, no, I think we're still safe there. Although, you know, with the spreading of the internet and the flattening of the world, we all have to watch out for very talented editors in India and China who can eat our lunch over the internet. It is conceivable to see film editing outsourced. A lot of visual effects work, and certainly a huge amount of animation is already being outsourced. So, you know, the computers, the fungibility of information is a great thing, but it also has this other edge to it that has unknown consequences. Final Cut 10, yes, no, well, I did sort of answer that question. A cautious, yeah, a blinking yellow light. How do you approach your job creatively? How do you, when is it time to walk away for a while? That's, you know, when you are working intensely 14 hours a day for 7 months, as we did, and sometimes double that on a film, you do get shack-wacky. After a while, it just becomes... So you do need a way to pull back. One of the techniques that I use is to, when I look at dailies, I'm seeing these images for the first time, and that's the only time I'll ever see them for the first time. They were shot yesterday, I'm seeing them today, or they were shot 2 hours ago and I'm seeing them in the evening, whatever it happens to be. But that's a very precious moment, and it's easy to squander it. Because the audience is going to see these images for the first time, once. And that's as close as you will ever come to what they will experience. So my trick is to sit there in the dark with this laptop, and I turn the screen off. I have FileMaker, I wrote this little program that is, and I just type in the dark, lots of mistakes, but roughly correct, of anything that I'm thinking. How do I feel? If I think banana for some reason, I don't censor that, I write banana. And 2 months later, oh yeah, that's the banana take. Actors use this as a trick or a skill in casting sessions. They'll wear a funny hat, or you know, a pin, or something that just is unusual, distinguishing them really almost arbitrarily from everyone else. Because again, when a casting director sees 50 actors in a day, that's kind of like me looking at 50 takes of a scene. After a while, was take 36 better than take 18? Oh yeah, that was the banana one. But I have those, and I have access to those. I print them out and look at them 2 or 3 or 4 months later, and it does clear the fog a little bit. It gives me access to some essential truth about what I'm doing. And then, yeah, getting up and walking away, that's the great thing about editing. As a director, you really can't do that. You are there. And you there are little techniques for giving yourself some space, but basically that's it. Whereas an editor can work an extra half hour, but then somewhere in the middle of the day go out and take a half-hour walk and just kind of think things over. How do you know if a scene works or doesn't? Well, it's kind of the same sort of thing, but it's you have to see things in context. A scene may work on itself, but it may not work in the film. And these are the most difficult kinds of, that middle part of the three braid, the writing part, is being able to say, this is a really perfectly good scene, but we have to take it out, or move it somewhere else in the film for the good of the film, for the good of the whole. And it's very dangerous to preemptively make a strike into the film before you've seen the whole film together. As you're editing a film, you have to really you obviously have to have opinions about what you're looking at and what you're doing, but you have to keep those opinions under control. Just say, okay, I don't really agree with the direction this scene is going, but I don't know. In the larger context, it may be great. So, hold back, give it the best shot that you can, and then once you see it in the larger context, then you can tell whether it's working or not. But even that's a fine line. And you can get into huge discussions with the studio and even with the director about, is this scene serving the larger purpose of the film? Is there one piece of advice about sound to impart to students, sound designers? Always go further than you think you can go. Try to, let's say, the literalness of an event. There's a certain compelling quality to being literal about things, but try mostly to bend that literalness to something else. Because really what you're trying to do is light a fire in the mind of the audience, and literalness doesn't do that. It's important occasionally to be literal, because that's sort of the ground. But most of the time, you want to levitate the film. Just the act of walking is an act of controlled imbalance. If we try to be balanced all the time when we're walking, we wouldn't do it. So we shift to the left, and then to the right, and then to the left. The moments of true balance, or literalness, are very few, but that's what keeps us moving forward. And by the same token, let's call it the metaphorical use of film sound is something that can really propel a film forward, because it ignites the audience's imagination without them really being aware of it, which is one of the most powerful things you can do. They subconsciously, their mind thinks, that doesn't really fit, but I get it, it's something. So you gain an image or a concept, which is the sum of two slightly different things. And that is particular and unique to every member of the audience. That's the phrase I like to use about the experience of seeing a film is mass intimacy. We want to appeal to thousands, millions of people, but we want to appeal to everyone in a unique way, where that person says, how does this film know that about me? And they don't even really formulate it that specifically. It's just, I love this film. But it's because that film seemed to talk to them about some secret that only they know. But that's particular to each person, and the reason it's particular is that the film has suggested things and not literally demonstrated them. And they have put it together themselves in their own unique way. So that's the intimate part of the experience. Conception and workflow changed since going digital. Yeah, but not, you know, as we had that quote from Victor Fleming, essentially it's the same. I did a remastering of The Conversation 10 years ago now. It's just come out on Blu-ray, or it's coming out on Blu-ray 3 days from now. But it's that remaster is now been Blu-rayed. But that was a film I edited in the early 70s, and here I was in the early aughts, or whatever we call it, and 30 years later, and I had it up on the Avid, and I was just kind of looking at it thinking, well, no, I was mostly just doing subtle, we were adding the music. We found the original stereo recordings of David Shire's music, and so we were adding those back. But, you know, I was thinking, well, will I make this different today? And I wouldn't. There wasn't anything that made me think, oh, I wish I would have done something different there. So what you do physically is very, very different, but what you're thinking as you do it is pretty much the same. What are you thinking about these days? I've been reading a book by this neurologist, neurophysicist, whatever they're called these days, by Ramachandran, who teaches at the University of San Diego in California. And he was trying a very difficult thing, which is to think about the neurology of creativity. And he mentioned many things in the course of talking about this, but one in particular intrigued me, which was an experiment that was done with, of course, a rat, our friend the rat, in a cage with a square and a rectangle being 1/66 aspect ratio. And the rat, if the rat went to the square, nothing happened. If it went to the 1/66 rectangle, it got some food. And all day, every day for a week, and eventually the rat, of course, just put the rat in the cage and made a beeline for the rectangle, and it got some food. The next day, the 8th day, the square was gone, and it was replaced by a 2-3-5 rectangle. And the rat came into the cage and looked and made a beeline for the 2-3-5 rectangle, thinking, if I got that much food from this rectangle, this other one, which is even more rectangular, must really give me food. So he made analogies to how human beings relate, and specifically, you know, advertisers are basically playing this trick on us all the time. They're finding something to which we are, some rectangularity to which we are sensitive somewhere up here, and increasing that, and we go for it. You know, with fast food, it's salt, fat, sugar. These are rectangles that were in short supply in our Stone Age years and are abundant now, but we still are programmed to go for the maximum, even though it's bad for us. So there's a you know, what is it that makes us value something of which we have no experience yet? That rat has never had the 2-3-5 experience. It associates food only with the 1/66 rectangle. So why does it go there? Because rectangularity is somehow in the brain as an abstract thought. And that's an interesting thing to think about. You know, animals, a rat, having the abstract, almost platonic ideal of rectangularity as a value, and that it will go for it. No, that's it. That's it. All right. Yeah.
You talk about the current 3D.
The question is, what about 3D? I got into, well, not trouble, but I wrote a letter to Roger Ebert, just a personal letter. I was supposed to talk at one of his Ebert-thons in Chicago a couple of years ago, and I couldn't go because of the volcano that blew up in Iceland. I was in Europe at the time, so we exchanged emails, and he wrote a review of Green Hornet or Lantern, whichever one was in 3D, and I wrote about my own experience editing 3D, which was on Captain EO, that Michael Jackson film that Francis Coppola directed for Disneyland in the mid-'80s. And I was happy to have done it. As a kid, I was a big fan of 3D comics, and I thought, this is the future, but it was a future that didn't happen. And there was a wave of 3D in the 80s, and it didn't happen, and we're in the middle of a wave now. One thing I observed at the time, which is that when you look at something in the real world, this bottle, my eyes, like a lens, focus at 4 feet away, but my eyes also tip in, they converge at 4 feet. So there's that, if this is the base of a triangle, then this is a tip. And if I look further away, that opens up. My eyes open up because the tip of the triangle is further away. So, but the point is, we're always looking at and converging, we're focusing and converging at the same point. And billions of years of evolution has been this way. When we look at 3D films, we're doing something different, which is that we're focusing at the plane of the screen. That's where the image is, actually. So we have to focus there, and you back there may be 100 feet from that screen. So you're focusing at 100 feet, but the thing comes out of the screen and it's 12 feet in front of you. So you have to focus at 100 feet and converge at 12 feet. And then maybe the opposite. You focus at 100 feet and you converge at 200 feet. And we can do it, otherwise 3D films wouldn't work. So we can do it, but it's like running a complex video on the laptop. The fan turns on. And as the equivalent of that, we get headaches, some of us, because we're doing something that we haven't been programmed to do, and we're trying to do it. We're being good soldiers. Okay, we'll do it, but it's hard, and the film also can abuse you of that. One of the things that we had to do in Captain EO was to make sure that at the cut point, that point of convergence was the same on the incoming shot as it was in the outgoing shot, so that we didn't fool around with people too much, because if it isn't, then at the cut point, you don't know where to look, and it takes a couple of, well, many frames for you to figure out, oh, there it is. And by then, you've lost a lot of information, and your brain has had to do that extra work. So this is a profound problem, and I don't know what the answer to it is. There are other more superficial problems, which is that the screen is low by a camera stop or two. The light is diminished at the projector, and then it's diminished in turn by the glasses you're wearing. So the images are dark. And the point at which moving things will strobe is sooner. Michael Jackson would dance to his moonwalk across the stage, and in 2D it would look fine. When I saw it in 3D, he would chatter. He would go across the stage. I don't know why. It has something to do with the fact that our minds are paying a lot of attention to the edges of things. And in 2D, you kind of say, oh, something like this. So your mind lets it smear. Whereas in 3D, because dimension is determined by the edges of things and aligning them, you're paying a lot of attention, and therefore you see the strobing that's always there. It's not like the strobing isn't there. It is in 2D, but the mind just kind of says, oh, it's okay. you don't see it because of the way our processing works. And anyway, there are a number of problems like that that are solvable. If we increase the frame rate, as Peter Jackson is doing, to 48 frames a second, maybe that will smooth out this strobing quality. And if you doubled the light coming from the projector, you would compensate. But all of these things are expensive. And, we'll see. We'll see. It's challenging.
Can you make me hot? Okay, could you bring up the house lights, David? And also, if anybody knows how to bring up those square lights, those thingies up there that makes
Work lights.
the work lights. And while we're putting the final touches on the wrap here, we have time for about 2 more questions because I'm just as interested as you are in the answers that he is giving. So if you have a babysitter at home, call them now. They're going to be late. So if anybody has any more questions, do it now. We have time for about 2 more questions.
If you were going to go away from Final Cut, where would you go?
I don't know. The question is, if I didn't use Final Cut, what would I do? I started using the Avid in 1994, 95. I'm very comfortable with Avid. I was called in to help finish the cut on Wolfman, the Benicio del Toro film. So I worked for a number of months. They were cutting on the Avid, so I just cut on the Avid. So there are some very good things about Avid that Final Cut doesn't have, and vice versa. So Avid is an option. I'm curious about Premiere, just because I'm curious about technology.
That's what I was going to say. Is it just Avid because it's familiar, or would it be Avid just because it's familiar?
I don't know. It would depend. It would depend.
James McCarthy, right there.
Walter, Apocalypse Now for me was a major inspiration for me to get into this kind of business. Is there something that, if I were to watch it again, and I'm understanding more and more about you, is there anything that you could tell me to look for, to listen for, and what you were thinking when you were doing both? I mean, the fact that you mixed sound design and edited it is marvelous.
Yeah, I mean, there was, we were doing a lot of things for the first time on that film. The whole 5.1 sound format was created for that film. And it was the first time a computerized mixing board had been used on a film. We were using an MCI board for 24-track mixing for records. We had converted it to film use. It was the first time 2-inch tape. So, most of the time we were thinking, will this work? Will it come together? That wonderful thing that happens in the first reel when Willard wakes up and he looks at the fan and he hears the helicopter sound. That was kind of a fortuitous event that happened just because a sound effect was still going on at that moment. But I remember putting that together and the experience of, I was editing on a camera, but I had the experience that this fan was making that sound. And I thought, well, if it convinces me who is doing it, then I guess the rest of the world will. Larger sense, I think pay attention to the use, the large sections of the film that are in mono. And then some that are in only stereo, and then some that are fully 5.1. The thinking behind that is similar to the 3D problem. One of the criticisms I hear of 3D from a lot of people is, yeah, I liked it for 10 minutes and then I forgot it was in 3D. And you think, well, why are we going to all this expense if it's not, we can't feel it? And we had the same problem with 5.1. we had the ability to be three-dimensional with sound, and so you think, well, we should do it all the time, and then we obviously realize the truth, which is no, don't do that, because then it becomes a pain in the ass. You just want to set up already with that stuff. So find the right moments to blossom into full 5.1, but then also find the right moment to collapse back down into mono. Stay in mono for long enough to kind of make it bite, where you, oh, well, this is the new normal. And then at the right moment, come up into stereo, fronts only, and then the right moment to be fully engaged. If you listen to the, just before they arrive at the Playgirl dance, Willard is looking at his notes in the inside of the boat. That's all mono, and then they start to hear things, and people, their heads pop up, and then it becomes stereo. And then as the boat moves into the lagoon where the show is going on, then it becomes full 5.1. So that's and the film is doing that a lot. So it's just something that would be good if you paid conscious attention to it, just as a learning experience. But it's something I would urge on sound mixers, the way I urge standing up for editors. And one last thing, which is, how many of you have backed up your computers?